Hello, 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 and welcome back to Shiksha DaCosta as we begin a new unit working with one variable data. This is quite a chunky unit. In fact, we'll be doing lots of things in this unit. We'll be identifying situations that involve data, and specifically that's very simple data that only involves one variable, one quantity that is changing. And in those situations, we'll design questionnaires and experiments for gathering that data. And as part of creating those questions or experiments, we will consider, what's the most ethical way to do this? How can we respect everyone's privacy? How can we make sure that we get honest responses? And where would our data be biased? And we'll learn what that word means. We'll also collect one variable data. So once we're done figuring out what situations involve it, we'll start collecting it from secondary sources. And we'll organize and store that data using all sorts of tools, especially spreadsheets. We'll also be able to explain what is the difference between a population and a sample, and what makes a good sample. Why would we need to sample something? Why couldn't we just, look at the population? We'll explore this later for sure. We'll keep going on to describe and compare different ways to sample our data. And then we'll collect that data from primary sources using some good techniques that we will develop as part of this unit. And then we'll organize and store that data again, using the stuff that we've practiced here, that spreadsheet technology. We'll move on to identifying different types of one variable data and then representing that, using graphs or maybe using hand-drawn graphs with and without technology in its appropriate forms. Continuing on, we'll also learn to identify and describe different properties associated with something called distributions of data. So are all the data points, are they all around a certain number, or are they all sort of evenly spread out? In what ways are they distributed? We will take that data and we'll analyze things called measures of central tendency and spread. We'll figure out, okay, what are the different ways we could do that? What is the best one to use? So we'll explain the appropriate use of them. And then we will actually compare two different data sets, or even maybe more than two, using these two measures, a measure of central tendency and a measure of spread. Finally, and this is sort of a big picture thing, right? We will solve problems by interpreting, analyzing one variable data that's collected from secondary sources. So all of this stuff together means that you're successful at these skills when you can solve all sorts of problems involving one variable data by collecting that data, organizing it, analyzing it, and finally evaluating it. To get our heads in the right space for this, let's take a look at this survey that went out to a class. In this class, students were asked to self-assess, so look at themselves and say, okay, how often do I complete and submit all classwork and assignments? How often do I do that on time? Do I manage my behavior in class? Do I arrive to class on time and prepared to work? And just take a second and pause this video here and think about, what do you notice? Well, one of the things you might notice is that more than half the students seem to always do all of these things. And, most of them would even say, even about 76% of them, almost 77% of them, either do this always or usually, which is pretty good. And about less than a quarter of them would do this sometimes or rarely. And so those aren't great study habits. We want to make sure that we would work on those. But we would see that generally speaking, the students in this class are pretty responsible. Okay? So that's some of the things that I might notice about this. Looking at just one particular student, let's take a look at all of their marks in various units. Okay, so we can see that in Unit 1 they got an 84%, in Unit 4 they got a 68%, Unit 7 and 8 they crushed, getting 100% in both. So what should their overall mark be? This is a question that a teacher frequently has to decide when they're looking at all of their different marks. What one number should go on their report card? What one number would best represent how proficient this student is in their course? One of the things we can do with this data is we can try to look at it. Numbers are very hard to sort of imagine, the size of them. So one thing we can do to start is maybe put them on a graph. Now, doesn't this look a whole lot better? We're able to see that, oh wow, this bar is nice and big. Those are those units that the student got 100% on. Ooh, this bar is kind of low. And maybe our eyes, when we're reading the numbers, we sort of skip over a number like this. But when we see it on a graph, we're able to see very clearly, whoa, unit 6, this student needs to work on this. But either way, we're trying to get to one number. So what one number would represent all of these all at once? Well, some people might say we might use something called the mean. So when we're finding the mean, we take all the numbers, we add them all up, and we divide it by the number of numbers that there are. So there are 8 units. So when we take them all, we add them together, and we divide it by 8, we get a number that's approximately 78.875%. So we might say, okay, so this student, I should give them probably a 79 on their report card. We could also measure something called the median. The median is basically what number would be in the middle of all of these. And before we can find that out, we have to put them in order from least to greatest. So that 49, that would go first, and going all the way up to 100. And then the way we find the median is we start crossing out numbers at the top and at the bottom. So 49 and 100, 68 and 100, 70 and 84, and there's not one number in the middle, there's 2, because there are an even number of data points. When you're trying to calculate the median and you end up with just 2 numbers in the center, you just find their average. So you add them together, you divide it by 2, and you might say, okay, this half of this student's marks were above 80% and half were below. So you might say maybe 80% would be a good number to represent their overall proficiency in the course. One more way might be the mode. So you might take a look at the student's marks and say, okay, well, they got an 84, but they only did that one time. So I don't think it would represent everything that they did. Ooh, they got a 49, but again, they only did that one time. So I don't think that would represent all of their marks either. But 100, well, they got that 2 times. That was the most consistent mark. That was the mark that they got the most often. So you might say to yourself, I'll give this student 100. Now, that may be, you may disagree or agree with that. That's up to you. I think for me, my personal one would be the mean. I really like, a good average of all of these would give me a good number that sort of represents all of them. It's not too far away from any of them. But it's up to you to pick which way you would want to represent all of this data. This is one variable data, right? Because we're only looking at the student's marks. And we're trying to find one number that represents all of our data all at once. The last thing that we could look at is something called the range. The range is basically, from the smallest number to the largest number, how big is that gap? So we can see here, this student's marks fell between 49 and 100. That's a range of 51 numbers that the student's mark can fall in, which is really, really big. That makes it really hard to say that this student consistently got one number or another as their mark. 51% means their mark could have fallen anywhere here for any given unit. And that's what we're going to be doing in this unit. We're going to be working with one variable data just like that. Large amounts of data. Now we only looked at 8 data points, but sometimes we'll have many, many more than 8. We can take that data and we can condense it into a graph, like a column or a bar graph, or even a histogram to help us visualize that information. And when we do that, we actually understand it a little bit better. We process it mentally a little bit more easier. And we're able to draw inferences. So we're able to say, what does this mean? How can we actually use this? We can also use measures of central tendency like mean, median, and mode. And to do the same thing, we can try to process that data and make it easier to actually manage. Finally, we can see how far apart these data points are by using measures like range and standard deviation. These are terms that we will encounter in this unit. So I'll give you a chance to maybe get started on these concepts in this unit, and we'll develop it as the unit goes on. If you like this video, please like, rate, subscribe, and join our mailing list. And you can find this lesson as well as practice questions, solutions, handouts, and more on our storefront. Thanks and have a great day.